Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, Egypt reels from its worst attack in modern history. This after militants armed with guns and explosives killed over 300 in a crowded mosque in the restive Sinai province. France's President Emmanuel Macron personally hands the prestigious Chirac Prize for conflict prevention to Raquel Dink, the widow of assassinated Turkish-Armenian journalist Hrant Dink. Also on this week's Middle East Matters, Lost in Lebanon. We're joined in the studio by the sisters behind a film about Syrian refugees trying to rebuild their lives amidst an ongoing crisis. But first, the world shook once again on Friday when Egypt's Sinai Peninsula was struck by the deadliest attack in the country's modern history. Gunmen carrying the flag of the Islamic State group killed more than 300 worshippers in a mosque. Among the victims, 27 children. Now, according to analysts, the onslaught marks a need for change in the government's anti-terrorism approach. Here's Alex Jennings.
A mass of makeshift graves for those killed in Egypt's deadliest attack in recent history. As weekly prayers came to an end at the Al-Roda Mosque in northern Sinai, up to 30 militants detonated a bomb outside the building. Worshippers who tried to flee were gunned down instantly. Within hours of the attack, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi ordered airstrikes on jihadist targets in the Sinai Peninsula, an area that's familiar with attacks. Arid and mountainous, the region is both difficult to monitor and geographically strategic. The Suez Canal, vital to Egypt's economy, runs along its western border, and to the east, a shared border with Israel and the Gaza Strip. Once used to smuggle arms and people, the Sinai province has become a terrorist stronghold since Mohamed Morsi was unseated as president in 2013. Security services, as well as civilians, have repeatedly come under attack by groups affiliated with the Islamic State organization. The situation took an international dimension in October 2015 after a Russian commercial plane which took off from Sharm el-Sheikh airport exploded mid-flight, killing everyone on board. The Islamic State group claims responsibility for the attack, saying it was a response to Russian airstrikes in Syria. Despite a crackdown from Egyptian authorities, the violence in Sinai has refused to cease. February this year saw repeated gun attacks against the Coptic Christian minority, and 23 soldiers died in July after car bombs hit 2 military checkpoints in an attack claimed by the Islamic State group. The latest tragedy in northern Sinai, the first attack of its kind to target a mosque, could be a sign that Egypt's military crackdown against terrorist organizations isn't working.
This is a continuation of an exclusive security approach, which really has proved to be failing and may indeed be exacerbating the crisis. Much of Sinai has been under emergency law since 2014, with a very heavy military presence and heavy anti-terrorist activity. State newspapers regularly report on the killing or capture of militants in Sinai. But journalists and independent investigators are barred from the area. It's very hard to verify these claims. It's hard to understand what exactly is happening on the ground there.
The Sinai branch of the Islamic State group is believed to be the main suspect for Friday's attack, but no organisation has yet claimed responsibility.
To Lebanon, where political parties are scrambling to bring a crisis to an end, which started with the surprise resignation of Prime Minister Saad Hariri almost 3 weeks ago from Riyadh. In his televised speech, Hariri blamed interference by Iran and Hezbollah for his decision. Some have since claimed that he quit under Saudi duress. Now, back in Beirut, Hariri is threatening once again to leave. That's if the militant group Hezbollah refuses to accept a new power-sharing arrangement for his country. Now, the Chirac Foundation awarded its 2017 Prize for Conflict Prevention to the Istanbul-based Hrant Dink Foundation, which was created after the assassination of a Turkish-Armenian journalist and activist Hrant Dink himself in 2007. And it was his wife who picked up the prestigious award on his behalf.
A murder on one of the main avenues in Istanbul. 10 years ago, Turkish-Armenian journalist Hrant Dink was shot by a young nationalist in front of the offices where he was editor-in-chief of a newspaper. The offices had been empty and unused, but they'll soon be a place of memorial dedicated to dialogue between communities.
Our project is to make this place somewhere that confronts the past but also addresses the future, a place that encourages dialogue, memory and above all hope.
The hope is for a reconciled Turkish society, something Hrant Dink fought for throughout his life. Now, after his death, he is succeeded by a foundation in his name. It's continuing Dink's work in the fight against the discrimination that persists in Turkey.
It's not just discrimination against Armenians, it's discrimination against the Alevi, Kurds, Laz, Circassians, non-Muslims. The Hrant Dink Foundation is fighting for the survival of Anatolian culture.
Part of the foundation's work is regularly organising conferences and continuously tracking hate speech in the media, which is compiled and published in weekly reports.
Syrians are linked to insecurity and crime. The kamikaze is Syrian. The Syrian thief was arrested. The Syrian assassins failed to flee. More and more people are contacting us, and an increasing number of people are reading our reports. What we share gets more and more clicks on social media, so there's a certain awareness.
In a Turkey that is still deeply nationalist, the Dink Foundation says it will probably take many more years of work to truly change people's attitudes.
Over 1 million Syrians have fled to Lebanon since the civil conflict broke out 6 years ago. Increasingly, these refugees are facing mounting hostility. According to one recent report, some are even under threat by eviction. Now, a documentary by sisters Sofia and Georgia Scott takes a closer look at this humanitarian crisis by telling the story of 4 Syrians and their personal battle to rebuild their lives. Here's a clip from Lost in Lebanon.
فقلنا له يا اخي انا خوفي من الترحيل، يعني انا صار الهاجس الامني تبعي انه انا راح اترحل على سوريا. شو اترحل على سوريا؟ شو معناته اترحل على سوريا؟ اعدام خالص.
Sofia and Georgia Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Sofia, we'll start with you. Of course, this is unfortunately a story that has dominated the headlines since 2011. What makes your documentary different to all the other refugee films that we're seeing?
I think, we tried to make a film that very much gave the Syrian people an identity that was not just attached to a fleeing poor refugee. And we came across so many wonderful people across Lebanon who were battling with their own stories. And we wanted to try and give them some dignity, and not just to show people struggling, living in a tented camp in the middle of the Bekaa Valley, which obviously happens hugely. But we wanted to try and bring something different to the table, to make a film where anybody, you, your uncle, your sister, can identify with these people. And I think that often in the news cycles where you just see something very short, that's the power of long-format documentaries for us.
Now, Georgia, of course, you've opted for somewhat younger protagonists. What was the decision behind that?
Sofia and I, our main passion is to capture stories, but especially stories from young people who are widely forgotten. And I think that in Lost in Lebanon, we have 4 characters, from a 19-year-old young man who's lost amongst the chaos of the refugee crisis in Lebanon, to a young father who's just welcomed his newborn child into the world. So I think we've captured an array of stories that really show the essence of the struggle that many Syrians are facing today in Lebanon.
Of course, I picked up on another theme amongst many others. Of course, one of their main aims is, of course, to rebuild their lives very immediately, but they're also working to create a world for the future generations. Did you two leave with any hope, or were yours also shattered like the refugees?
No, I mean, for sure, all of these 4 characters and everybody around them gave us massive amounts of hope. Reem is a young, independent female struggling to be a future leader. You know, all of them, the one thing they have in common very much so is that they see a future inside Syria. They're just waiting on the borders inside Lebanon to be able to return and build up what is right now an extremely devastated country.
Now, Georgia, we heard in that clip that there's also a fear that some of these people may be sent back. Even President Aoun has said that he wants some of these refugees to actually go back to Syria, even if not voluntarily.
You know, the first thing that they said to us, they said to us, we're just waiting to go home. They don't want to be in Lebanon. They want to go home to their country, that is Syria. But unfortunately, today, you know, more than ever, right now in Syria, it is unsafe, and they face either going back to detention and arrest or to death. And there's no life there for a young Syrian, I don't think. And I think it should be our responsibility to offer something more to the youth than what Syria has to offer today, right now.
Now, in this film, do you think that you managed to accurately capture the Lebanese perspective? We're talking about a tiny country of 4.4 million. 1.5 of them are, of course, Syrians.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it's a big question. You know, a documentary, even though we have 83 minutes to play with, still we can't capture every person's voice. What we wanted to do was capture the Syrian people's voices, and they themselves address the Lebanese issue. They say, I feel like a burden here in Lebanon. So they recognize the pressures. Lebanon is this tiny country. So for us, you know, we interviewed many Lebanese, including people who work around the Syrian communities. We interviewed the head of Human Rights Watch at the time, Nadim Houri, who is Lebanese. So his voice is in the film. Unfortunately, we can't cover every aspect, and I do feel comfortable with the angles represented in this film, and I think the Syrians themselves address that issue.
Sofia and Georgia Scott, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. That's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. You can always catch up on our latest news and shows on Facebook and Twitter. Do stay tuned to France 24.
Down to Earth, presented by Merit Dundas.
The Arctic is going to be exploited, and the scale of this exploitation will only grow.
We have a beautiful planet, we need to protect it, and we can use space exploration to better understand it.
Now we've moved from, is that real, to what do we do about it?
Join us on Down to Earth as we explore the incredibly complex relationship between humans and our planet. We're here to ask the difficult questions and find answers that may just surprise you.
Down to Earth on France 24 and France24.com.
We are journalists, and normally you have to listen to us, but you have things to tell us too. Maybe you've experienced a dramatic event, or you've got something important to say. You want to make a difference. That is why we created The Observers. Now, the first step is very easy. You get in touch with our team. Send us your images, tell us what you've seen. And then it's our job to get your voice out there, on our site, on social networks, on your mobiles and tablets, and on TV, of course. You can appear in our weekly show via webcam. Or perhaps we'll come see you in person, where you live, in your country, your town, and we'll work together on a report for our investigative show, The Observers Direct. So you get the idea. This show is your show, your way to get your voice out to the world.